Today on Cyberwork, Jonathan Braley joins us from the Food and Agriculture Information Sharing and Analysis Center, Food and Ag ISAC to its friends, to talk about the security challenges being faced by the food, farming, and food production sectors.
So we're tracking up to 250 different adversaries, nation-state groups, cybercriminal groups, hacktivist groups, and we've built out these kind of historical playbooks.
Now, food and ag feature a lot of physical systems that are more explicitly connected online, which means more opportunities for attacks that can have global implications to the food supply.
We outsource a lot of food globally. It's not just the U.S. that's going to feel impacts from cyber events. It's going to be a whole world problem.
Let Jonathan give you the inside scoop on what you need to work in food and ag security.
If you had any background or knowledge in protecting operational technology, ICS, I think that would be a huge plus.
As today on Cyberwork. The IT and cybersecurity job market is thriving. Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts 377,500 new IT jobs annually. You need skill and hustle to obtain these jobs, of course, but the good news is that cybersecurity professionals can look forward to extremely competitive salaries. That's why InfoSec has leveraged 20 years of industry experience, drawing from multiple sources to give you, Cyberwork listeners, an analysis of the most popular and top-paying industry certifications. You can use it to navigate your way to a good-paying cybersecurity career. So to get your free copy of our Cybersecurity Salary Guide ebook, just click the link in the description below. It's right there near the top, just below me. You can't miss it. Click the link in the description and download our free Cybersecurity Salary Guide ebook. Your cybersecurity journey starts here. Now, let's get the show started. Welcome to this week's episode of the Cyberwork Podcast. My guests are a cross-section of cybersecurity industry thought leaders, and our goal is to help you learn about cybersecurity trends and how those trends affect the work of InfoSec professionals, while giving you some tips and advice for breaking in or moving up the ladder in the cybersecurity industry. My guest today, Jonathan Braley, is the director of the Food and Ag ISAC. The ISAC provides threat intelligence, analysis, and effective security practices to help food and agriculture companies detect attacks, respond to incidents, and better protect themselves. Jonathan and his team produce curated threat analyses for the sector and represent the organization to policymakers and industry stakeholders. In addition to this, he also serves as the Director of Threat Intelligence for the Information Technology Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or IT ISAC, where he acts as the technical and analytic lead for a team supporting the world's leading technology companies. So those who have been with Cyberwork for a while know that we've been doing some cybersecurity by industry episodes, including several on industrial control systems, manufacturing, infrastructure. So when I heard about Jonathan and his involvement with food and agriculture security, I knew we absolutely had to have him on the show. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So to give our listeners a better chance to learn about you and your origins, what was your initial interest in computers and tech? Because I know you started out studying biology, but what was the thing that got you first interested in making the switch to security?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I went to James Madison University. Really, when I got to college, probably like a lot of people, I just really didn't know what I wanted to do. Actually started pre-med. I moved to kinesiology at one point, eventually realizing that I always had this passion for computing and an interest in computers. So later I kind of did a 180 and started doing that instead. And I think part of that passion comes from, I grew up in the early 90s. My mom worked for my uncle. He had an IT services company. So I spent a lot of hours at that office, often on, at it for the time, pretty sophisticated computers.
Yeah.
And I remember being one of the first kids in my neighborhood to actually have a home computer. Just because my uncle was able to get us one. So, I don't really know where biology came from. I did grow up in North Carolina. I had a big connection to the water and the outdoors, and kind of went into college thinking that would be the route to go, and then realized you should just follow what you're interested in.
Yeah.
And that's what I ended up doing.
Yeah, I think that's that's a pretty common refrain, is that you hit college and you instantly sort of give up the things you're interested in favor of the things you think you should be interested in, or that'll help you make your way in the world. And yeah, it rarely lines up, unfortunately. Like your real nature will come out and remind you of what you need. So that's good.
Yep.
So looking through some of your past positions, I want to ask you about some of them. You spent some time at Valley Apps as a G Suite deployment specialist. before joining the Information Technology Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or ITISAC, as a director of threat intelligence in 2017. So that was around the time that you got your bachelor's degree in information technology, data and network security. So can you talk about how this career pivot happened and what you needed to learn to do in terms of hands-on activities and how that sort of translated to the IT ISAC role?
Yeah, I was very fortunate to get that opportunity at Valley Apps. I actually did a lot of the work there while I was in school. So kind of getting that work-life balance was a little bit difficult, but I actually started out doing search engine optimization for their previous. So Valley Apps had a business where they actually were primarily a web design company. I had taught myself HTML, CSS, and I was doing a lot of work updating clients' websites, but also optimizing kind of the metadata so that they would rank higher in search engines. And then Valley Apps became one of the early companies to actually partner with Google through a partnership program they have. And the whole company, we got certified and trained to actually migrate and deploy businesses from, some of the more archaic email systems to Google's business email platform. So that's where I really started to understand the cybersecurity challenges that kind of small and medium-sized businesses were facing. Many of the clients we had were, on these email systems. There's no security, no MFA. They didn't have backups for their file systems. It was kind of a Wild West. They just picked a free service and were using that, and then later realized that they should probably upgrade to, domain-based email or something with a little bit more security. At the same time, this was when HIPAA compliance was rolling out. So a lot of the clients we were getting were moving to Microsoft and Google's platforms because they were meeting some of those new regulations that were there. And that's when I really started to understand the cyber side of things. Ended up being the main deployment specialist for Valley Apps. My job turned from migrating and deploying to also educating some of our customers on, what they should and should not be doing to protect their networks and email systems. And then I also got a whole bunch of skills in communication, project management, started to learn networking, email systems, DNS ports, things like that. But it was a great opportunity for me. That really gave me a lot of confidence from a cybersecurity perspective. But I think I also gained a lot of tangible skills that have kind of followed me into this role at ITISAC.
You were talking about some of your clients and how, it was kind of the Wild West and they would, pick a free service and go with it, and there would not be a whole lot of security measures in place. Now, when you say that they didn't use MFA and they didn't do these other measures, were those things available to them and they just didn't know to use them? Or was it, because it really was at that point, like there wasn't a lot other than your regular old passwords and stuff like that, it seems like. But
Right.
like, what was the sort of disconnect there? Was it?
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it. This was, 2011, I think, through 2017. I was there, and we hadn't seen ransomware yet. There definitely were phishing attacks. People were getting their email stolen. There was business email compromise, which we saw quite a bit of. But I think MFA wasn't fully adopted. There's a lot of email systems that didn't have it. Like you said, it was mostly just username and passwords. And nowadays it's rare that we see a product that doesn't offer it.
It's almost standard operating at this point.
It's such an essential thing to have if you really want to protect systems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's interesting because that's something we take for granted now. But at that point, there was a lot of, I guess maybe partially people didn't really know the scope of the threat, but also just didn't want to think of them. Because they couldn't really
then the
imagine.
other thing is, I'm migrating these email systems, and part of that was usually having to get the usernames and passwords. So I really got to see some of the interesting passwords that people were using.
Yeah.
Which doesn't surprise me.
A lot of names of pets and stuff, I imagine, and
or
names of
just
children.
password or 1 2 3
Password.
4.
Yeah, 1 2 3 4.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, I mean, break out in a cold sweat just thinking about those.
Yeah,
So, in addition to IT ISAC, which you talked a little bit there, so if the past year and a half, you've also been the director of the Food and Ag ISAC, which is Information Sharing and Analysis Center. It's similar to the IT one, but for the Food and Agriculture Center, which is the thing I really want to talk to you about today. So, what exactly is the Food and Ag ISAC? Is it a government agency? Is it an independent organization? What are your primary responsibilities?
Yeah, good question. So the Food and Ag ISAC is not a government agency. We're actually a nonprofit organization. We're run by our board of directors who are also members of the ISAC themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And our membership is actually restricted to private sector companies. That being said, we have a really good relationship with CISA, FBI, USDA, and we're still collaborating with them, but they don't have, direct access to our members and conversations that are happening. So a little bit of background about ISACs, or Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, which I was very impressed you nailed that whole long name of IT ISAC on the first shot. But they were established to support U.S. critical sectors. They were mostly developed in the early 2000s. Many of them are made up of private sector companies. There are a few that have some direct government involvement, but essentially there's almost an ISAC for every U.S. critical sector. So information technology, electricity, health, transportation, financial services. Most of them have an ISAC involved. Now, some of your listeners may have also heard of ISOUs. These are very similar to ISACs, but they typically support more niche communities and not the broader critical sectors. So, like a sports ISOU or something that doesn't really have a critical sector representing it. There's plenty of ISOUs to support those as well. So, background on the food and ag sector, they never had a formal ISAC. So, in the early 2000s, the ITISAC started to receive membership applications from food and agriculture companies, which at the time we thought was strange. And then we realized that there wasn't a food and ag ISAC that they could go to. And we realized that some of these larger food companies, and medium and small, but they had the same IT challenges that our IT companies were facing, right? So it made sense for us to bring them in. As the number of agriculture companies grew in our membership, we actually formed a Food and Ag Special Interest Group, or SIG, which was part of the ITISAC, I think since, late 2000, 2008, somewhere there. And we ran that all the way up until the formal Food and Ag ISAC was established. So we've been supporting the food and ag companies for a while. We've been kind of their ISAC. I think some attacks against the sector over the past few years raised awareness that there was not a formal ISAC for the sector. So kind of hearing that feedback, hearing discussions kind of just around the landscape, we decided to rebrand the SIG into that official food and agriculture ISAC. So one of the things that's great about the rebrand is the Food and Ag ISAC still currently sits under that IT ISAC umbrella. So for a member to join the Food and Ag ISAC, they basically join the IT ISAC, and if they're a food company, they just get pushed straight into that. And what the benefit of that is, those trusted relationships that they'd built with those IT companies over the years, they can still have those. And then the other thing was we were able to get the Food and Ag ISAC operational immediately. We already had the sharing procedures in place, the functions, the nonprofit identity. So it was very easy for us to just basically rebrand that SIG. But now we're doing a lot more stuff for that group as well.
Okay, I guess I want to pull back one layer from there with regards to the idea of an information sharing and analysis center. Give me some concrete examples of the type of information that you're analyzing and sharing, whether it's in food and ag or IT or infrastructure. What are the commonalities of what these types of organizations actually do for their client base?
Sure. Yeah. So, the goal of the ISAC is to have this peer-to-peer communication of companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they can share relevant, actionable cyber threat information. So one company sees something, they distribute it to an ISAC. The ISAC lets all the other members know that has happened. We don't just stop there, though. I have an operations team, so we're also trying to proactively help with some of the analysis work. But essentially what we've done is we've created a forum for companies to share what they're seeing. They can ask questions. My team will then kind of supplement that sharing with some of our own curated intelligence. So we have a daily report. We're looking at critical vulnerabilities, patches. We're putting indicators of compromise that relate to IT sector attacks, food and agriculture attacks. We're doing kind of an analytical summary of the major happenings throughout the cyber landscape across, the specific sectors, but more generally.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're doing We do a lot of other things too. We have a very robust ransomware tracker. So we've been looking at
Mm.
ransomware attacks going
Hmm.
back to 2020. I think we're around 6,500 events as of yesterday. And we're tracking ransomware attacks across all critical sectors. So we're looking for trends. What are the top groups? Of the groups that are attacking, what's the percentage breakdown for the IT sector or the food and ag sector? And what's great about that is now that we have this data, we can look for trends. If there was suddenly a spike in attacks against food and agriculture companies, we could look at our list. We could look at the groups that are doing the attacks. We could try to figure out, is there a common product or service that has a vulnerability that's maybe widely used by food and agriculture companies? So that's been a really big benefit for the community is kind of doing that tracking and analysis on ransomware. And then another thing that's possibly unique to us is we have a collaborative adversary playbook environment. So we're tracking, I think we're up to 250 different adversaries. So these are nation state groups, cyber
Mm.
criminal groups, hacktivist groups. And we've built out these kind of historical playbooks, what are the tools these groups are known to use?
Hmm.
What vulnerabilities have they impacted in the past? We use MITRE ATT&CK framework to try to tag the actual tactics and techniques that these groups are doing. But what's great about it is it's collaborative in the sense that our members can also add to these playbooks. So we kind of have that force multiplier effect to track. I think one thing we realized is we have hundreds of members and they're all spending the same amount of time looking at the same adversaries. So we wanted to kind of find a way for them to start sharing with one another. But other than that, we're always trying to help any way we can. So we get feedback from members. We're always looking to improve our analytics, and it's been a very good environment so far.
Great. Well, yeah, like I said at the start of the show, ever since I started inviting guests on the podcast to
Mhm.
specifically discuss industrial control system security and then later manufacturing and infrastructure and related areas, it's one of my favorite targets to explore because it's such a crucial space to keep secure and safe, but it also gives professionals opportunities to kind of connect their talents and passions with challenges that I feel like have countrywide and even global implications. So
Right.
obviously food and ag is like right at the top of that list. So let's start with some basics. Like what are, from a security perspective, what are some common targets when it comes to food production and like what are hackers trying to break into basically?
Yeah, I think there's a couple angles to this. So we kind of have different buckets of threat actors, and a lot of that is based on I guess who is sponsoring them, but really it's what their motivation is, right? So you have financially motivated threat actors. You've got some that are geopolitically motivated. They're getting the backing of a nation state to try to achieve certain strategic objectives. And then there's this ideological aspect to it too, with some of the hacktivists. And for food and ag, that could be due to global tensions, but there's also certain groups from a animal perspective where they're dealing with threats from that as well.
Mhm.
So, cyber criminals that are financially motivated, they are often very opportunistic. So it's hard to say that any of these groups are specifically going after food and ag, but I think just by the nature
Right.
of their widespread, attack patterns, they
Okay.
are doing things like invoice frauding, they're doing ransomware, they're just doing phishing and business email compromise. And I think food and agriculture companies are getting pulled in that way.
Hmm.
But then there are those sophisticated actors, some of the nation state backed ones, and there's a couple reasons they might attack food and agriculture companies. There is sensitive intellectual property that the sector is known to have. So an example is some of the genetic work in food and ag. It can take, a decade to develop, certain seeds, right? And
Hmm.
there's a lot of resources, time, expertise that goes into that. So these adversaries might try to steal that intellectual property so that they can kind of bypass their own developmental timelines. They might be looking for a competitive advantage on certain products or technologies, or
Hmm.
might try to overthrow a certain crop or product on the market. And they might also just be looking to be less reliant on the US for food. So I think that's kind of the nation state perspective. There are some examples of, if there ever was a serious global attack, right? Or if we went into a real global conflict with another country, they could theoretically also target the food and agriculture sector to disrupt it, right? That would cause some big problems for us. And then, they are cyber criminals, but some of these ransomware groups have been a big problem across all sectors. I think one of the challenges for food and ag is they have this just-in-time delivery of products and services, right? So they can be especially disrupted by ransomware attacks. I won't say
Yeah.
that they are any more targeted than other sectors, but when they are a target, we can see some big problems with that. So I think generally, the food and ag sector is dealing with a lot of the similar problems that other sectors are. I wouldn't say there's anything super specific, but they do have, by their nature, challenges with some of the cyber attacks, and that they can cause very quick problems for human health and safety and food availability.
Yeah, no question. So you said the type of attacks are pretty standard across the board. You see phishing, you see ransomware, you see business email compromise. Have you seen any kind of like food and ag specific tricks or infiltration methods that are sort of unusual to this industry as opposed to say like water or electricity or government targets?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, phishing, poor patch management, those are always going to become some of the more common attack vectors, especially
sure.
for some of those small and medium-sized businesses. But there is that manufacturing, operational technology, industrial control system aspect of food and ag. And I've seen, there's been some examples recently where food and ag companies have been pulled into some of the global tensions. So there was some hacktivist groups after the Russia-Ukraine situation, right? So same with Israel-Palestine. Some of these hacktivist groups were going after industrial control systems. There was a vulnerability that was found, and that impacted the water sector pretty heavily, but there was some food and agriculture companies that were pulled in as well. And I think one of the challenges with OT and ICS is that these manufacturing environments were not always internet connected. They used to be air gapped. They didn't have all these connections, but we're seeing a big shift for a lot of reasons where these facilities are becoming smarter. They're getting internet connected products.
Yeah.
Now this is a huge swath of machines that now are going to have vulnerabilities that need to be patched, are going to be connected to the internet where they're going to be exposed when a vulnerability happens. And it's a little different when your workstation computer goes down, then an entire, plant gets taken down by a cyber attack. So there's a lot of challenges with it. And I think that's one of the big concerns we have as a group, is making sure that those are protected and mitigated properly so they're not exposed.
Yeah, in manufacturing, they talked a lot about like edge computing and having these sort of far off, not connected centrally, but these processes, especially around manufacturing and sort of inspecting and things that could sort of wend their way back to the source and do all kinds of awful things with escalation or whatever. I'm assuming that's similar, since food and agriculture has such a sort of mechanical component about it that those are also probably issues to deal
Right.
with.
Yeah, and IoT as well. So, the things that used to be kind of manual, like even sprinkler irrigation systems, things like that, some of them are becoming connected with internet accessibility, which makes us a lot more productive. But every time you add internet component to a device like that, it's another device that you've got to monitor that's going to have vulnerabilities that, it becomes you take a small environment of products that are vulnerable, and all of a sudden you've got this huge environment of lots of things that could potentially have problems. So just kind of the nature of it.
So one of the things I noticed when talking about like state and local government security was discovering, for example, like small towns and municipalities were often prime targets for attackers for various reasons, not just their budgets, but sometimes they just didn't know that a small village like them could be the target of global cybercrime, and local government agencies didn't have any security posture in place just because they don't have the budget, or they just didn't feel like they meant to. And I've done a little reading on the topic of like state and local government circuit riders that travel to small towns and set up basic security for their local government infrastructure. I mean, is there a similar split in agriculture between, say, these large corporate farms and small family farms in terms of both resource allocations, but also you having to kind of educate these smaller farms, quote unquote, targets, that they, have these same sort of global challenges that their larger peers do?
Yeah, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. We hear that sentiment a lot, not just in the food and ag sector, but generally we hear companies say that they believe, they're too small or too irrelevant to be targeted by cyber attacks. But I'll tell your listeners that that's a dangerous mindset to have. I mentioned earlier that a lot of these cyber attacks are opportunistic. These threat actors are using mass phishing campaigns. They're scanning for vulnerable publicly exposed systems. And I believe that a lot of times they don't know who the victim is until they find that vulnerability and actually
They
breach them, right?
have the piece of the
So,
puzzle. Yeah.
yeah, so with cyber attacks, it's, we often say it's not a matter of if, but when one will happen to you. I think that mindset's changing a little bit, but that's the other challenge too. There's some really small farms. They don't have the resources or the IT staff to deal with some of these challenges. And I think a lot of them may not currently or haven't in the past had a lot of technology to worry about, but we're starting to see, more and more technology being implemented every year. So I think sooner or later they're going to have to start considering cybersecurity as part of their kind of operational plans, because it's more than likely that they're going to have issues. So yeah, one of our goals is to help the sector understand the risks that they face. We're offering threat intelligence not only to members, but we're also trying to distribute that down to the sector as a whole. We know not everybody's going to join the ISAC, so we have done things like we partner with trade associations as well as some universities so that we are able to produce a weekly report, which kind of gets disseminated down to folks that might need it. But it's a big problem, and a lot of the larger corporations you mentioned are working directly with these smaller farms. So even if the large corporation isn't impacted by a cyber event, if they have these small ones that are, one, that's a problem from a productive standpoint, but also sometimes an attack against that small partner, if there's some sort of shared infrastructure, things like that, can also become a problem for the larger one as well.
Okay, so pulling even further back to that, I
Mhm.
mean, can you talk about the security threats facing food and agriculture and how the ones in the U.S. tie into kind of global issues around food production? Because, like you said, if a small one falls, it can take a larger one with it. But then I imagine that can even escalate up to multi countries and nations and so forth. Is that something that you have to consider as well in your work?
Yeah, definitely. Well, one, I think what's very interesting about the food and ag sector and the companies we work with, a lot of them are global, right? They've got operations worldwide. And I think
Hmm.
that's one of the things I've been very impressed about working with the analysts at these companies is they have to have that global perspective. I think a lot of the times as analysts, me being US based, we kind of have a selfish vision of what's actually going on, but they needing to consider the whole impacts. But you're spot on. If you had a cyber attack, there's some very sensitive windows for planning and harvesting, for example. And if you had a cyber event that disrupted that could cause problems globally, right, for
Hmm.
countries around the world. And then some of the global tensions, Russia, Ukraine. Russia went after agriculture in Ukraine, right, which they supply a
Hmm.
lot of different products around the world, and people had to go reach out to other countries to try to find how to get the same food that they normally expected.
Right.
So, yeah, it's definitely an interesting problem. The global kind of nature of it, it's food and ag's very far-reaching. We outsource a lot of food globally, and it's not just the U.S. that's going to feel impacts from cyber events. It's going to be a whole world problem.
Yeah. Now, you said in our introductory discussion the other week that quote, you don't have a background in food, but you live in rural Virginia and you've been around farms your whole life. And that once
Hmm.
you sort of started digging into the issues facing food and agriculture sector, you found that it was a lot more interesting than you realized. So, for people who are interested in doing this kind of work, can you talk about the things you've had to learn about the production side of the food industry that aspiring food sector security experts will need to understand really well?
Sure. Yeah, when I joined the ITSAC, pretty early on, I started managing that Food and Ag SIG, which became the Food and Ag ISAC. And
Hmm.
I didn't know how interesting those calls would be,
Hmm.
but I quickly realized how important the ISAC was to this community. Members were sharing what they were seeing, collaborating on common challenges, and kind of as I mentioned, there was a large global view to this. It wasn't just the local U.S. It wasn't confined to U.S. based threats, and
Hmm.
I kind of just realized how important the sector was, and I was very impressed with the knowledge that the analysts had. But I think being near the farms now too, I have a much better appreciation for it. And
Hmm.
when you start to really learn about the sector and how important it is, I think if you even look back in history, there's a lot of examples of food being targeted because that's how you really put pressures on
Oh yeah.
a society, right? So I think we need to, as global tensions kind of rise, it's important for us to really think about food and safety. And I'm happy that I'm able to help, the food and ag sector with dealing with some of the cyber stuff that's popping up.
Okay, yeah, I asked
Mhm.
partially because, so for instance, when I was talking with certain industrial control system people, they were saying that to do the job well, you couldn't get away with just having a security background. You needed to know a little engineering. You needed to know a little bit about the sort of mechanics of how these different processes are happening and the way that your like security system is maybe affecting the timing of these things, or maybe um, testing based on like the quantity of, say, lye that's going into a water supply or things like
Mhm.
that. So I guess I wanted to ask if it's a similar thing in the food and ag sector where you don't really necessarily have to know how uh, these sort of irrigation systems and stuff work. It's more that
Mhm.
you're still sort of essentially defending, um, the perimeter in certain ways. Is that a reasonable assumption?
I think it is, but it all kind of is the same thing, right? It's
Yeah.
all these products, while they have different applications, they still are dealing with the same sort of threats. And
Mm.
I'll say that the analysts I work with are often defending the networks, but they do
Mm.
have a really good understanding of the production side, and they are also dealing
Okay.
with. Often there's a team that's helping with the IT security, and then there's a separate team with the OT security. But we're starting to see a definite merger between those, especially as there's been more connections between them. But I'm also very impressed with the analyst's ability to. I mean, you kind of a little bit have to understand um, food and farming and what your company is actually using because you're going
Right.
to, in a sense, have to protect those things. But I think the actual act of securing these networks is very similar. There is some segmentation and things that have to happen
Mhm.
because. So I guess looking at ICS, one of the challenges with it, some of the machinery is designed to last 20, 40 years, right? So the operating system it comes with, was that designed to be updated over time? Did they
Yeah.
account for the new security vulnerabilities and tactics that are coming out? So I think there are some challenges from a manufacturing perspective of securing, and then just the nature of it. The underlying operating systems and things like that are going to be a little bit different than the IT. But it all comes together. I think they probably take a more holistic look about
Right.
security, and as you mentioned, kind of putting up that wall on the outside to protect what's inside of it.
Yeah, nice. So again, because a lot of our listeners are looking for their first job or working on their sort of career plan now, what is the job market like for food and agriculture cybersecurity professionals? Like, where are the jobs? Like, would you expect to be working in the government, local government, nonprofits, working for a large farm, all of the
Mhm.
above? Is it mostly sort of being under the employ of a certain organization, or is there a large freelance population? Like, what's the spread here?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of excellent opportunities for upcoming cybersecurity professionals to join food and agriculture companies.
Okay.
Probably more those larger ones. I don't like I mentioned earlier, a lot of those small farms, even the medium-sized ones, I don't know if they have a huge, kind of IT staff, cybersecurity staff to help deal with that. But there's plenty of opportunities. I hear often that there's a lack of skilled professionals to support the larger food and agriculture companies. I know that a lot of them have job listings open right now. I can't speak too much for the federal government or local government. I don't work with them as much, but I know that the private sector companies in the sector are dealing with cybersecurity. They have very robust capabilities. I've always been really impressed with the security operation centers that these groups have, and I hear often that they are looking for candidates. So um, I think there's plenty of work.
Yeah. Oh no, there's no question that
Mhm.
there's plenty of work. Definitely.
Yeah.
So, you said that, before, when you were in biology, but before that, you've always been pretty tech focused and you've had access to sort of, state of the art computers, and it's always been fascinating to you. But I guess I want to get a sense of if there are any particular extracurricular skills that are unique to sort of the food and agriculture industry. Are there any particular skills paths, certifications, qualifications, experiences that you should be trying to get maybe when you're in your studies or just after that would be desirable? Like, was there anything particularly, I guess because you had ISAC in your background, but like, was there anything about your background that they saw and said, oh yeah, this is perfect for food and ag? Or is there something that you can sort of show off on a resume that says, oh, they definitely know this, they understand this sector?
Yeah, I was a little lucky just because
Mhm.
I really didn't have a very good perspective on food and how it works, but I learned very quickly from the members just hearing what they were talking about on a day to day. But I can talk a little bit about, from a security analyst perspective, things that you would likely want if you're trying to get a job with one of these food companies. Obvious things, network security is great. Uh, a lot of all these food companies, they have very typical corporate environments. So some of the jobs are going to be the same as working for a major IT company. But I think
Mm-hmm.
what stands out to me is that many of the analysts I work with from these companies have a pretty good understanding of the products and services that are unique to food. So if you had any background or knowledge in protecting, operational technology, ICS, I think that would be a huge plus. Then also I'll go back to having that understanding of global threats and motivations of certain adversaries would be big. I'm a huge supporter of MITRE ATT&CK. I think the matrix that they had
Yeah,
done is really great. And in
totally.
there, you can pick different adversary groups. You can see what they're doing. Having that sort of experience, understanding the adversaries, who they are, what they're doing, what are the main ones that have possibly attacked the sector before. I think that's all great. And then certifications and experience is good. I have gotten feedback from members that, simple things like communication skills, eagerness to learn,
Mm-hmm.
general interest in food and agriculture, I think are big as well. Like most jobs, there's some skills that you're expected to have, but a lot of it's going to be on the job training. They're going to have to train,
Oh yeah.
anybody that comes in. But I think having the eagerness to learn, having good communication skills, having at least tried to have an understanding of network security, and that will be a good kind of stepping stone for hiring managers.
Yeah, awesome advice, all of it. So, one of the things that we hear a lot in terms of, you know, after the interview, why didn't I get the job? If you're able to sort of ask and stuff. One of the things that I think is pretty common is that, an entrant doesn't really have a handle on the specific issues either of the company they're applying to or the industry as a whole.
Hmm.
This in particular, I feel like, uh, could really kind of deep six your chances if you don't really understand what's going on in food and agriculture right now. Is like, where do you sort of keep up with issues, or where would you suggest like a newcomer? Like, are there certain trade publications, certain websites that you check in on regularly? Like, where do you sort of keep abreast of sort of changing uh,
Yeah, that's
issues?
that's a really good question, and it's a hard one.
Hmm.
You know, I've been running the Food and Ag ISAC since 2017, and part of my job is finding the newest stories that as they relate to cyber and food. And you
Hmm.
often don't see it. I don't know if the sector isn't as flashy as maybe some other ones, because I know
Right.
that the attacks are happening. We see the attacks, but it hasn't been as widely reported on as some of the others. I'm starting to see more stuff coming out. There's a couple, prominent uh, reporters that are starting to focus on food a little bit more, which is great. A lot of this stuff is coming from us. So I guess the first thing I'll plug in is, we have a website, we're posting reports and things like that. We have social media presence where we're
Okay.
trying to highlight what's happening in the food and agriculture sector, but it can
Nice.
be kind of difficult looking specifically for agriculture and cyber. But again, they have a lot of the same IT challenges, cybersecurity challenges that every other company does. So
Hmm.
finding ways to do that research, getting in a habit of going on to some of those major blogs, trying to see what's new, what's happening. I'm a big fan of things like Reddit and some of those other sources where people are
Yeah.
posting new stories as new attacks. And techniques and vulnerabilities come out. I think starting that before you're done with college, before you start applying for jobs is huge. If I'm hiring somebody and I know that they know about the latest stuff that's happening, that's always a good sign for me. So I definitely encourage people to be proactive on that front.
This has been a great conversation, but before we go, Jonathan, I want to ask you something I ask all of our guests. Do you have a piece of career advice that you've received that has stuck with you through the years, whether it was from a parent or a mentor or a teacher or just something you read, an inspirational book?
Yeah, nothing that's probably in a book, but I'll just share some of my own perspective on
Please.
my own personal journey. But sometimes I surprise myself that I've made it this far. I will say I put full effort into everything I'm working on, big or small. I think another piece of advice is whenever I get an offer to help another team, join a new project, even if you already feel overwhelmed, it's a good thing to do that. I think you gain a lot of new skills when you kind of work outside of your comfort zone.
Oh, yeah.
And then lastly, mindset, I think, is incredibly important. When you have a big project, a speaking opportunity, a presentation, when I hire new people and for my team, it's very easy to get overwhelmed and stressed, especially if you're not comfortable doing those sort of things before. And I don't know if I learned this from somewhere or if it's just something I've done, but I try to train myself in my head to be excited for it, right? Instead of feeling stressed or anxious, if you tell yourself, I'm excited for this opportunity, I'm excited to jump on this podcast right now and talk to Chris. I think changing that mindset and trying to be excited for different opportunities helps things go a little bit smoother.
Yeah, you can never really completely get rid of anxiety, but it's you can train yourself to sort of like hold it in one hand while you can sort of have an equal amount of excitement in the other hand and let them balance each other out. And yeah, that's something you just learn by doing it over and over and over.
Yeah, that's the other piece of advice too. If you're uncomfortable speaking in public, start speaking in public, because the more you do it, the easier it gets. So
yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned following the Food and Ag ISAC online and reading and learning. Like where should people go to do that? What's the website? Where's all the links?
Yeah, so we have a website. It's foodandag-isac.org. We have membership information there if anyone's interested in joining, but there's also, a whole bunch of public reports. We have a small and medium size business security guide, which I don't think I talked about that yet, but we basically built a guide for small farms, and it has 10 low cost, easy to implement things that you can do to improve your cybersecurity posture. So we can't send a small farm the NIST cybersecurity framework and expect them to do that. So we've come up with this really simple list, things that are going to put you in a better spot, won't cost you any money. We have some examples of, it'll show ransomware and how applying these security measures would have prevented certain things. So that's a public report. It's free. Hopefully folks will use that. We've been working with our university partners and trade associations to try to get the word out on it. We're also, we do quarterly ransomware reports, which focus specifically on the food and ag sector. We're pretty active on LinkedIn and I wanted to say Twitter, but X. And I think with October's Cybersecurity Awareness Month coming out, I'll be on different podcasts. Oh, yeah. I worked with CISA in the past on some events they were doing, and then we'll probably be posting just on social media kind of tips and tricks throughout the month.
Okay, well, specifically if our listeners want to learn more about you, Jonathan Braley, should they follow you on LinkedIn? Do you have an X or any other sort of social media things that you want people to check you out on?
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't have a huge social media presence. I am on LinkedIn. If anybody wants to friend me there, I'm happy to do that. I do a lot of media engagement, so we often do public reports, things like that. Last year, I joined CISA for some webinars during Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So I suspect I will be doing that again, but really probably the best bet is to follow the Food and Ag ISAC, LinkedIn and Twitter, and often we have links to the stuff that's happening and things that we're doing.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for your time and insights today, Jonathan. It was great talking to you.
You as well. Thanks, Chris.
And thank you to everyone who watches and listens and writes into Cyber Work with feedback. If you have any topics you'd like us to cover or guests you'd like to see or just want to talk, just drop them in the comments and we'll see if we can get to them. But before we go, I just want to remind you to check out infosecinstitute.com/free, where you can get a whole bunch of free and exclusive stuff for Cyber Work listeners. You can learn about InfoSec's new career immersives, which can take you from a complete beginner to job ready in 6 months' time. by a combination of live instruction, hands-on practice, and personalized career coaching that can fit any schedule. InfoSecInstitute.com/free is still the best place to go for your free cybersecurity talent development playbook. You'll find our in-depth training plans and strategies for the 12 most common security roles, including SOC analyst, penetration tester, cloud security engineer, information risk analyst, privacy manager, secure coder, ICS professional, and more. One more time, that's InfoSecInstitute.com/free, and the link is in the description below. One last time, thank you so much to Jonathan Braley and the Food and Ag ICE, and thank you all for watching and listening. This is Chris Lenko signing off. Until next time, keep learning, keep developing, and don't forget to have a little fun along the way. Bye for now.